Simla in 1972 has often been viewed as a battle of wills between Indira Gandhi and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. All the advantage and all the strength was with Indira Gandhi. She was the victor. We had 93,000 Pakistani prisoners of war under our control and in our custody. Bhutto, on the other hand, was the defeated party, and he desperately needed to get back 93,000 prisoners of war. More importantly, he desperately needed to ensure that he returned to Pakistan without being humiliated. In your eyes, it's Bhutto that emerged the winner, not Indira Gandhi. You write, and I'm quoting you, at the end, Bhutto the dramatist had carried the day at Simla. And you add, Pakistan was right in its assessment of the Simla Agreement that it lost the war but won the peace. Do you stand by that?
Of course, I write with full responsibility, and what I write, I stand for that.
You stand by everything you're saying to me.
I always make a responsible statement as far as my knowledge, my intellect goes.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. A recently published book seems to answer what is perhaps the key question about the India-Pakistan Simla Agreement of 1972. At the time, it was perceived as a battle of wills between Indira Gandhi and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. The key question is, who got the better of the other? This book, called Negotiating India's Landmark Agreements, concludes that Bhutto carried the day, and as a result, Pakistan lost the war but won the peace. But on what facts and arguments is that conclusion based? Joining me to answer that question is the author of the book and the former head of the Historical Division of the Ministry of External Affairs, Avtar Singh Bhasin. Mr. Bhasin, I want to focus this interview on the key point you make in your essay about the Simla Agreement of 1972. You write, and I'm quoting you, Pakistan was right in its assessment of the Simla Agreement that it lost the war but won the peace. Let's go through the different points you make to come to this conclusion one by one. First, you write, a careful study of the pre-conference developments and discussions at various levels left one with the impression that the terms of the conference were set by the defeated party. For those who have not read your book, can you explain what's the evidence that leads you to say this?
Bhutto repeatedly, directly to Government of India and also through Soviet Union, conveyed to New Delhi that agreement has to be honorable and keeping in view the sovereignty of Pakistan. Nothing which is derogatory to Pakistan or its sovereignty or in any manner will be acceptable. And it has to be equitable and on basis of equality discussed between two countries. One country cannot dictate the other country. This was conveyed clearly directly to New Delhi as well as to through Soviet Union to New Delhi. Beside that, who was anxious for the agreement? It was not Pakistan. Pakistan was, of course, but who took the initiative? Instead of Pakistan taking the initiative that let us have peace talks, let us there be peace treaty so that the normal things could resume or 93,000 soldiers could be released. It was India in February 1972 which conveyed to Pakistan through the Swiss ambassador who was looking after the political interest of India and Pakistan both, that India is willing to negotiate a peace treaty without any preconditions. And when Pakistan's response was a little bit delayed, India conveyed in a letter to the Secretary General of the United Nations and to all the members of the Security Council that India is willing to negotiate an agreement without preconditions at any time, at any place. It is not
So
Pakistan who said that.
you're saying two very important things. First, you're saying the initiative for the peace treaty was taken not by the defeated party. Normally, it would be the defeated party that would beseech the victor for peace. In this instance, it was the victor, India, that took the initiative. Secondly, India gave an assurance to Pakistan that it would be a meeting without any preconditions. And Pakistan itself insisted that it should be honourable. And it, in fact, sent that message to India, not just directly, but also through the Soviet Union. These are the reasons why you believe that, in fact, the pre conference developments and discussions suggest that the conference agenda was set in a real sense by the defeated party, not by the victor.
Besides that, Pakistan was anxious about Kashmir, that India might dictate terms on Kashmir and settle the matter. Now, Bhutto had conveyed to Soviet Union and through Soviet Union to New Delhi that there will be no agreement on Kashmir. India, Pakistan is willing to settle Kashmir on the ceasefire line, but not now, later on, after some time. Because now negotiating on Kashmir would mean it is negotiated under duress.
You're saying again a very important thing. You're saying Bhutto set a condition before he even came to Simla that there would be no agreement, no understanding on Kashmir, because that would be difficult for him to accept. So that was set as a precondition by Pakistan before it even came to Simla.
See, just before the talks in Simla were to begin, Bhutto had sent his Minister of Defense and External Affairs, Aziz Ahmed, to Moscow to convey to him what are the specifics on which he will be prepared to negotiate. And one of the most important points that was made was on Kashmir. Before that, let me put it in February 1972, D.P. Dhar, who was earlier ambassador in Moscow, was now chairman of the Policy Planning Committee in the Ministry of External Affairs, has visited Moscow and met Kosygin. Kosygin asked D.P. Dhar, what are you thinking about Kashmir? That part of Kashmir which you say is a bleeding sore. Do you intend to have a surgical treatment or do you want to bandage it? He warned Kashmir should be kept out and no attempt should be made to sort it, to have it taken out.
So Kosygin also warned D.P. Dhar that Kashmir should be kept out and no attempt should be made to seek an agreement on Kashmir.
See, when the talks were to begin, Soviet Union sent a memorandum to New Delhi based on the talk with Aziz Ahmed. By the time the Soviet ambassador came to ministry with the memorandum to be handed over to the Prime Minister, she had left for Shimla. And the memorandum was handed over to External Affairs Minister Swaran Singh. Swaran Singh read it and he understood it that Pakistan is willing to settle on this ceasefire line right now. So he said, if this is settled, there will be no problem, all problem will be sorted out also. But Swaran Singh somehow failed to read between lines that not now, later. And Pakistan always stressed, yes, we are willing to settle on Kashmir, but not now, later.
That's the important point. Let's come now to the second important point you make in your argument. You say at the Simla conference, Bhutto responded to Mrs. Gandhi's suggestion that the existing ceasefire line provided the best solution to the Kashmir problem by agreeing, and the but is very important, insisting this could not go into any agreement because if it did, he would be thrown out by the people of his own country. He said he needed time to prepare his people for this solution in the long run. So this agreement was an unwritten verbal agreement, nothing more.
Well, you are right, because all evidence shows that nothing was written down. I give you the testimony of one of the senior officers of the MEA who was present at the dinner the night the agreement was signed. He said, suddenly during the course of the dinner, both Mrs. Gandhi and Bhutto left the dinner and went into a room. And they discussed something and came out. Now, if there had been any written thing, then some stenographer would have been called in, and that typing should have been done. No, this eyewitness officer sitting in the hall where dinner was going on never said that there was any stenographer called in. In 1995, much later, no, let me first come to this. When Mrs. Gandhi came out of the meeting after Bhutto 1 to 1, she briefed both her principal secretary, Aksar, and secretary P.N. Dhar about what had transpired. Now, normally it is expected that officers will record their conversation with the Prime Minister for record and for posterity. None of the two recorded it.
Absolutely. I want to quote to the audience what you say about this. Because the best information we have about this verbal unwritten agreement, and I'm underlining it, it was a verbal unwritten agreement. The best information we have about it is that Mrs. Gandhi briefed her principal secretary, P.N. Dhar, and she also briefed P.N. Huxer. Forgive me, it's the other way around. She briefed her principal secretary, P.N. Huxer, and she also briefed P.N. Dhar. But you add, and I'm quoting from your book, neither of them made any official record of what was told to them, and both, you say, were remiss in not recording what was told to them. Isn't that right?
Absolutely right. Now, P.N. Dhar in 1995 wrote an article in the Times of India. And that article was also printed in another journal. In that, he confirms that there was a briefing from Mrs. Gandhi to both of them. Why he did not record it, he doesn't say. Maybe, this is my presumption, since what Bhutto had said to her in the one-to-one meeting was exactly the same thing which he had been saying all through. Now, for instance, on the 1st July, at the full conference, when Kashmir was raised, Bhutto said, let there be peace, line of peace. We can settle it later. Let people come and go. We can
That
settle
is
it
the
later.
important phrase. Whenever Bhutto talked about the possibility of converting the ceasefire line into a formal border, whether he called it a line of peace or whether he called it an understanding, whenever he talked about it, the important phrase was, it can be decided later. It wasn't something he was planning and agreeing to do in 1972 in Simla. It was something that would be done later. That's the important thing. It was a verbal, unwritten understanding reached in a quiet room between the two principals, Indira Gandhi and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, but for execution and implementation on a later unspecified date. Isn't that right?
More than right, sir. Even before the last day, 1st September, 1st July, in the delegation talks, Aziz Ahmad, who was leading the Pakistan delegation, when Kashmir was raised, he made it clear that it cannot go into record. It will not be settled now. We will have it settled later as required, but not now. He
And in
also had
fact,
it made clear.
the other point you make, which flows out of what we've been discussing so far, is that as a result, we do not have a clear idea of what this verbal unwritten agreement was. We certainly don't have an authentic and precise idea of that agreement. You write, and I'm quoting you, what was agreed verbally between the two leaders has since remained a mystery, since there is no authentic record of the conversation. This means all we know is that there was a verbal unwritten agreement between the two principals, but we don't have any idea of the contours of that agreement in specific, authentic terms.
I will go a little further. You know, Mrs. Gandhi wrote, after 1973, when the prisoners had been released, and Bhutto started his
And let's come to that
shenanigans.
later. Let's go through this step by step. I know where you're coming to. Let's come to this step by step. The next point I want to make, because I think it's very important for the audience, is that you also in your book emphasize the reason why this was only a verbal, unwritten agreement, why it never got recorded on paper. You say the understanding so arrived at between India and Pakistan was verbal so that it would pass muster with the Pakistan National Assembly and the people of that country. In other words, the simple, straightforward reason why this was a verbal agreement, an unwritten agreement, and nothing more is because Pakistan wouldn't accept anything more.
Yeah, Bhutto repeatedly said that if he signed any agreement on Kashmir, he will be thrown out. He had enough enemies in Pakistan, both in the civil service, in the army, in everywhere, and he will be thrown away if he signed any agreement relating to Kashmir. So he was very clear from the day one that nothing of this sort will happen. Even French, on the eve of the discussions, had told Indian ambassador, sorry, DP Dhar had gone in February 72 to Paris. And the president of the country had told him, keep Kashmir out. Because if Kashmir is brought in, then other thing, any other matter will
So,
not be
in fact,
settled.
we were getting advice from several leading international countries to keep Kashmir out. Kosygin gave that advice, and separately, the French president of the day gave that advice. Is that right?
Exactly.
So, the conclusion we come to at this point of the argument that we're having is that, in two very important senses, Pakistan prevailed at the Simla conference. First, you say the terms of the conference were set by the defeated party. And secondly, the character and nature of the most important outcome was left verbal and unwritten at Pakistan's specific behest and requirement and insistence. So, both in terms of setting the terms of the conference and in terms of the critical outcome, Pakistan prevailed.
Undoubtedly.
Now, India paid a very heavy price for this absence of proof. I'm quoting from your book. The absence of a proof of the understanding arrived at between them, we're talking about Indira Gandhi and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, was acutely felt when Pakistan, after Bhutto had been executed, completely denied any knowledge and challenged India to produce the note if it had it. So, because there was no written note, because P.N. Huxer and D.P. Dhar failed to record what Mrs. Gandhi had briefed them, when Pakistan began to deny that there was such a verbal, unwritten agreement, we were left defenseless. There was nothing
You
we
are,
could fall back on.
you are right. This is the point I made in my book all through. Later on, even Mrs. Bhutto, when she became president, prime minister of the country, she also said there was no agreement, there was no written thing. And Mrs. Gandhi wrote Bhutto 4 letters
Five,
until
five, five.
five, sorry, 5 letters until when he was in the seat in the, as prime minister, president. In no letter did she mention to him of his promise on Kashmir because he was making all sorts of statements on Kashmir that you are entering into this discussion which you had promised to settle, but you are not doing it. And never,
Absolutely.
never even remotely
You, 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 you,
reprimanded him for his discussions.
you make this point very forcefully in your book. And what you point out in your book is that some of the responsibility, not all, but some of the responsibility for failing to record that a verbal unwritten agreement had been reached falls on Mrs. Gandhi herself. You point out in your book, after the Simla Agreement, she wrote letters to Bhutto on 5 separate occasions. The 30th of March 1974, the 22nd of May 1974, the 20th of March 1975, the 11th of April 1976, and the 31st of December 1976. But you say, and I'm quoting you, in none of these letters did she even remotely refer to his verbal commitment of 2nd July 1972. And the point you're making is that she could have, indeed, she should have referred to it, but she failed to do so. And in failing to do so, she too did not leave behind any written reference that we could have held up and said, hang on, this is it.
It creates little doubt even on the verbal statement also. Even if she had referred to verbal statement, that would have been proof of it. She referred to nothing that there was any understanding in the one-to-one meeting.
Can I ask you this? If Mrs. Gandhi failed in 5 letters, not in one or two, but in 5 letters, to make any reference to a verbal understanding, could it be that in fact this verbal understanding wasn't really an understanding? It may have just been a conversation, but they never got to the point of reaching an understanding, which is why she didn't refer to it. We may all be mistaken in believing there was an understanding. It may have just have been a conversation where this issue was raised, but no understanding was reached. Could that be the answer?
That is exactly what T.N. Cole wrote in his book later, that there was no agreement of any sort.
So
It,
T.N. Cole, who was foreign secretary,
yeah, and was
denied,
present.
denied that there was any agreement of any sort, neither verbal and certainly not written.
Yes,
So
that
he's
is the
supporting the argument I'm putting to you.
well. You see, there are various sources, various information. We have to put all together and then see there was apparently some understanding but no agreement. Agreement is different from understanding.
This is very interesting. We're now coming to a conclusion, if conclusion is the right word, that we know for sure there was no written agreement, but we're also now questioning whether there was a verbal unwritten agreement. There may have been a conversation, but whether that conversation led to an understanding, we simply don't know. Because if it did lead to an understanding, one presumes that Mrs. Gandhi would have referred to it in her letters. One presumes that maybe Huxer and D.P. Dhar would have made some record of it. But because neither Mrs. Gandhi nor D.P. Dhar nor Huxer ever referred to it in writing, it's possible it was just a conversation between the two principals. It never got to the point of being an understanding. Leave
Well,
aside.
even sometimes conversation can also be understanding. But question is, unless the people who had entered the conversation make reference to it somehow or the other, it remains a conversation. One cannot say anything right this way or that way. So it's a matter of conjecture how you take it.
So let me put this to you. On the assumption that there was an understanding, and I'm underlining that, on the assumption there was an understanding, would you say Mrs. Gandhi's failure to refer to it in her 5 letters to Bhutto, as well as Huxer and Dhar's failure to record any note of what Mrs. Gandhi briefed them about, actually in the end let India down?
Well, yes and no. Yes, of course, because if there had been one line recording, all this controversy would have died. No, perhaps there would have been no controversy.
So they
Perhaps
let India down. So they let
one line
India
of
down.
understanding recorded by Daksar or P.N. Dhar at that time would have a great, great archival value, which later on written article 1995 by Dhar had no meaning at all.
Quite right. You say in your book, if Huxer and Dhar had recorded a note, it would have had unimpeachable archival
Exactly.
value. That is also true if Mrs. Gandhi had mentioned it in her letters. That too would have had unimpeachable value.
Undoubtedly, undoubtedly. One written word has always unimpeachable value than hundred understandings
Which
otherwise.
is why I come back to my question. Did these three, Mrs. Gandhi, P.N. Huxer, Mr. Dhar, did they let India down by failing to put it down in writing in some form or another?
Well, it is how you look at
What's your answer?
it. My answer is yes, because I have recorded it also.
So you personally believe they let India down?
Yes, because I believe in records, and records are the best testimony when time later on. Today, I may say anything, but if I write a letter to somebody saying something, 10 years later, 20 years later, that will be a record of what I said. But verbally, I have talked with you. Well, if it is not recorded, then I can say, no, I meant this, I meant that.
Now, the result you point out is that after Bhutto's death, when Pakistan began denying the existence of a verbal agreement, The Simla saga got buried forever, you write, and India Pakistan relations returned to the pre 1971 days, and old disputes continue to dominate their relations. In other words, Simla was a potential turning point that was lost and wasted.
Undoubtedly, that's what I said also, except that India can draw satisfaction that it split Pakistan. There's no other gain. We wanted to settle Kashmir, it was not settled. And
And this
only
was a
result is,
and the important thing is Simla was a moment and opportunity when Kashmir could have been settled. We'd have
well,
gone some way towards settling it if that agreement had been at least referred to in writing. But because it simply remained an agreement that was unwritten, and we're not even sure it was an agreement because it may just have been a conversation and nothing more, Simla therefore becomes an opportunity that was wasted.
well, let me put it the other way also. Supposing there was a written agreement, Pakistan could always, after it was executed, say, look, he had done it under duress, we don't accept it. What could have we done? Have we gone to war again?
Quite
Will
right.
we embarrass
We,
Pakistan? Look at there is your prime minister or president had said so. That's all. It was the archival value. But we couldn't have forced Pakistan if it had gone back that they had to do it because it was done under duress.
Quite right. You're raising a good academic point that even if it had been a written agreement and Pakistan went back on it, there was nothing we could do because we wouldn't have gone to war to enforce it. But
Yes.
the truth is, we never even reached the point of it being a written agreement. And that's the key issue you make in your book. And you've now, in this interview, raised a further doubt, which I'm underlining for the audience, that it's quite possible we never got to the point of an understanding or agreement, even a verbal one. It may just have been a conversation which never got to a conclusion. It was just a suggestion and an idea which remained a suggestion and idea. And that is the important thing. That's an additional element of doubt that you've created in the course of this conversation.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Let me come to the end of this interview. Finally, Simla in 1972 has often been viewed as a battle of wills between Indira Gandhi and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. All the advantage and all the strength was with Indira Gandhi. She was the victor. We had 93,000 Pakistani prisoners of war under our control and in our custody. Bhutto, on the other hand, was the defeated party, and he desperately needed to get back 93,000 prisoners of war. More importantly, he desperately needed to ensure that he returned to Pakistan without being humiliated. In your eyes, it's Bhutto that emerged the winner, not Indira Gandhi. You write, and I'm quoting you, at the end, Bhutto, the dramatist, had carried the day at Simla. And you add, Pakistan was right in its assessment of the Simla Agreement that it lost the war but won the peace. Do you stand by that?
Of course, I write with full responsibility, and what I write, I stand for that. And if you permit me, I'd like to read a paragraph of the comments which Pakistan ambassador in Moscow, Jamshed Marker, made. And that is the last word I would say. If you permit, I read that one paragraph.
Go ahead.
starting from a position of greater possible disadvantage and weakness, Bhutto had a few cards to play except his own intellectual brilliance and innate diplomatic skill. Yet he managed to extricate his prisoners of war and recover lost territories without conceding anything of substance to the triumphant and dominating Indians. What cannot be ignored, however, are the skills and finesse that characterize Bhutto's performance at Simla and the substantive results that he achieved despite all odds.
The important point, Mr. Marker, the Pakistan ambassador in Moscow at that time, the important point Mr. Marker makes is that it was Bhutto's brilliance and it was Bhutto's skill at diplomacy that carried the day.
Exactly.
He emerged not only unscathed and not humiliated, he also got back the 93,000 prisoners of war, and he made no formal commitment about Kashmir. At the most, it was a conversation. At the best, it was an unwritten verbal agreement. But even that unwritten verbal agreement was not recorded in any shape and form by any Indian, Mrs. Gandhi, P.N. Huxer, P.N. Dhar. No one recorded it, as a result of which, when Pakistan chose to deny that such an agreement existed, we were left defenseless.
This is the most brilliant comment I've come across. And I explored all possible avenues to find some evidence where we may have not faulted, but it appears that we have faulted all along.
You stand by everything you're saying to me.
I always make a responsible statement as far as my knowledge, my intellect goes.
And in making this conclusion and in this book that you've written, and I hold it up one last time, you relied upon information, documents, files, correspondence that you had access to for the 30 years you served in the historical division of the Ministry of External Affairs, and you ended your career as director of that division. So you have had access to all the best resource material that's led you to this conclusion.
Let me clarify here. I have collected these materials after retirement and not while I was working there. I had produced 10 volumes India-Pakistan relations after retirement, and they're all classified and highly classified documents in these 10 volumes. And that is the basis of my understanding and my reading and my writing. So all this, what I am saying and what I wrote and what I published in 10 volumes is all collected after retirement.
Excellent. But you stand by everything you said.
Absolutely. I was not participant. So I cannot say anything.
Just answer the question, because I think the audience will want to hear you say it. You stand by what you said.
Without any iota of doubt.
I'll tell you why I keep insisting if you stand by what you said. Because Congress will descend upon you, Mr. Bhasin, like a ton of bricks. They hate anyone raising questions and doubts about Indira Gandhi, and in particular, they hate it when those doubts are raised in connection with the Simla Agreement. Are you prepared for the backlash from Congress that undoubtedly you will face?
Well, they are not going to. I can tell you why. I had written earlier a book, Nehru, Tibet and China, in which I totally blamed Nehru for all 1962 war, except for Jairam Ramesh, who at some point tried to criticize me, and I gave him back, and he never wrote back again. No one ever questioned my decision, my
You told me at the time that Mani Shankar Iyer had also expressed his.
Well, he expressed in a different way, but not criticized what I wrote. But he and nobody, there have been several reviews, several discussions of the book. No one, and I repeat, no one ever questioned my conclusions.
So you're saying to me The Justice Congress accepted as fact and as correct interpretation. Your book, which criticizes Nehru very severely and seriously for the 1962 war and for pursuing the wrong policies that led up to it, similarly, Congress will accept as correct your conclusion that India won the war, but Pakistan won the peace in 1971. You're confident Congress will accept reality and not criticize you.
Mr. Thapar, it's more than half a century. It's all part of history now. History is always written with the advantage of hindsight and are based on records. And nobody can deny history. History is not current politics. What may have happened at that time was the reputation of Mrs. Gandhi herself, and everybody called her Durga, even Bajpayee praised her. That was a different time altogether. But when you start writing history with the perspective of insight and based on records which were not available at that time, you come to different conclusions.
Okay.
That is why history is a dynamic subject, not a static subject. That once it is written, and that is the end of it.
All right, Mr. Bhasin, let's leave it there. I thank you for having given me so much time. And I thank you for that additional clarification, which is not necessarily in your book. And I'll hold up your book again, but you made it very forcefully in this interview that it's even possible that what we assumed was a verbal, unwritten agreement reached between Indira Gandhi and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in Simla might not even have been an agreement or understanding. It might just have been no more than a conversation. I thank you for that. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you very much, sir, for having me for this interview. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.